I thought I knew what betrayal felt like when I found out my fiancé Marcus had been living a double life for 3 years. I thought I understood heartbreak when I discovered he had a 7-year-old daughter he'd never told me about. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. But nothing, and I mean nothing, could have prepared me for what that same little girl would do to me 15 years later. What she didn't just surprise me. It didn't just touch me. It completely shattered every wall I'd built around my heart and made me question everything I thought I knew about love, family, and what it really means to be a mother. My name is Rebecca Chen, and this is the story of how a broken engagement led to the greatest gift of my life, and how that gift came full circle in a way that still makes me cry every single time I think about it. I was 28 years old, living in my dream apartment in downtown Portland, planning a wedding that was supposed to happen in exactly 4 months. The dress was hanging in my closet, the venue was booked, and I genuinely believed I was about to marry the love of my life. Marcus Williams had swept me off my feet 3 years earlier at a coffee shop on Hawthorne Boulevard, where I was grading papers for my 5th grade class, and he was supposedly working on his master's thesis in architecture. Looking back now, I should have noticed the signs, the way he never answered his phone on weekends, how he'd disappear for entire afternoons without explanation, claiming he was at the library or meeting with study groups I never met. The fact that in 3 years together I'd never been to his childhood home in Salem, even though it was only an hour away. But when you're in love, you make excuses. You fill in the gaps with trust instead of questions. The truth came crashing down on a rainy Tuesday in March. I was at the grocery store, picking up ingredients for the dinner I was planning to cook for Marcus that evening, when I heard a voice call his name from 2 aisles over. It wasn't unusual. Marcus was charming and made friends easily. But something about the tone made me curious enough to peek around the corner. What I saw made my blood turn to ice water in my veins. Marcus was kneeling down, eye level with a little girl who couldn't have been more than 7 years old. She had his exact same dark curls, his warm brown eyes, and when she smiled at him, it was like looking at a photograph of Marcus as a child. She was calling him Daddy, and he was responding like this was the most natural thing in the world. Standing behind them was a woman about my age with tired eyes and a grocery cart full of what I now recognize as single mother essentials: bulk pasta, generic cereal, children's vitamins. She was watching Marcus with an expression I couldn't quite read, part affection, part frustration, part something that looked dangerously close to hope. I stood there frozen, holding a bag of carrots and trying to process what I was seeing. This wasn't a chance encounter. This was routine. This was family. Marcus was hugging this child with the easy comfort of someone who'd done it thousands of times before, and she was chattering away about school and friends and asking if he could come to her soccer game on Saturday, the day he'd told me he had to work on his thesis. I don't remember walking home. I don't remember the 20-minute drive from the grocery store to my apartment. What I do remember is sitting on my couch, staring at the engagement ring on my finger, and feeling like my entire life had been revealed as an elaborate fiction. When Marcus came over that evening with his usual smile and his usual kiss on my cheek, I was waiting for him with the question that would change everything. Who is Sophia? I'll never forget how his face drained of color, how his hands, which had been reaching for the wine bottle on my counter, froze in midair. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. How his mouth opened and closed like he was trying to find words that simply didn't exist. Rebecca, I can explain. Then explain. Explain how you have a daughter I've never heard of. Explain how you've been lying to me for 3 years. Explain how you were planning to marry me in 4 months without ever mentioning that you're already a father. The story that came pouring out of him was messier and more complicated than I could have imagined. Sophia was the result of a relationship he'd had in college with a woman named Jennifer Walsh. They'd been young, scared, and completely unprepared for parenthood. Jennifer had wanted to keep the baby. Marcus had wanted her to consider adoption. They'd compromised by agreeing that Jennifer would raise Sophia primarily on her own, with Marcus contributing financially and spending time with his daughter when he could, but keeping that part of his life separate from everything else. Separate from everything else, I repeated slowly, including me. I was going to tell you, he said, and I could hear the desperation creeping into his voice. After the wedding. Once we were settled. I thought it would be easier then. Easier for who, Marcus? For me? For Sophia? Or just easier for you? That's when the real truth came out. Jennifer was struggling. She'd been a single mother for 7 years, working 2 jobs to make ends meet. And Marcus's financial support, while consistent, wasn't enough. She'd been asking him to take a more active role in Sophia's life. But Marcus had been resistant because he was afraid of how it would complicate his relationship with me. She's getting evicted, he said finally. Jennifer. She lost her 2nd job last month, and she's 3 months behind on rent. She asked me if Sophia could stay with me for a while, just until she gets back on her feet. I stared at him. And what did you tell her? I told her I needed to think about it. You needed to think about whether to help your own daughter avoid homelessness. It's not that simple, Rebecca. You don't understand. But I did understand. I understood that Marcus had been living a double life because he was a coward. I understood that he'd been keeping his daughter a secret because he was more invested in maintaining his comfortable fiction than in taking responsibility for his choices. And I understood that a 7-year-old girl was about to lose her home because her father was too selfish to inconvenience himself. I also understood something else, something that surprised me with its clarity and certainty. Bring her here, I said. Marcus blinked. What? Bring Sophia here, tonight. Rebecca, you're angry. You're not thinking clearly. I'm thinking more clearly than I have in months, I said, sliding the engagement ring off my finger and placing it on the coffee table between us. You want to know what I understand, Marcus? I understand that I don't want to marry a man who would let his child become homeless to protect his own comfort. I understand that I don't want to build a life with someone who's been lying to me for 3 years. But I also understand that none of this is Sophia's fault. You're breaking up with me. Yes, but that doesn't mean Sophia has to suffer for your mistakes. Marcus left that night, and I didn't hear from him for 2 days. I spent those 2 days calling in sick to work, crying until I ran out of tears, and then researching everything I could about temporary guardianship and emergency foster care. I'd never planned on becoming a mother, especially not like this. But sometimes life doesn't ask for your plans. Sometimes it just asks for your heart. When Marcus finally called, his voice sounded hollow and defeated. Jennifer wants to meet you, he said, before she'll even consider letting Sophia stay with you. She wants to know who you are. That's fair, I said. When? The meeting took place at a diner in Beaverton, halfway between Jennifer's apartment and my place in Portland. I arrived early and spent 15 minutes rehearsing what I was going to say, trying to imagine how I would feel if I were in Jennifer's position. How do you trust a stranger with the most precious thing in your life? How do you hand over your child to someone you've never met because the father of that child has proven himself unreliable? Jennifer arrived looking exactly like someone who was carrying the weight of the world on her shoulders. She was pretty in a tired way, with laugh lines that suggested she'd once smiled more than she worried, and hands that showed the calluses of someone who worked hard for everything she had. Sophia wasn't with her, and I was both relieved and disappointed. You're Rebecca, she said, sliding into the booth across from me. I am. Thank you for meeting me. Marcus says you want to help. Her voice was careful, neutral, like she was trying not to hope for too much. I do. I know this situation is complicated, and I know you have no reason to trust me. But I care about Sophia's well-being, and if there's something I can do to help make sure she has a stable place to stay while you get back on your feet, I want to do it. Jennifer studied my face for a long moment. Why? It was the question I'd been dreading because I wasn't sure I had a good answer. How do you explain that seeing a child who might become homeless had awakened something fierce and protective in you? How do you articulate that learning about Sophia's existence had made you angrier at Marcus for hiding her than for cheating on your relationship? Because she deserves better than this, I said finally. Because she shouldn't have to pay the price for the adults in her life not figuring out how to take care of her properly. And because I think I can help. You think you can help, Jennifer repeated. You've never been a parent. You don't know what you're signing up for. You're right, I don't. But I'm willing to learn. Jennifer was quiet for a long time, stirring her coffee and looking out the window at the parking lot where March rain was turning everything gray and soggy. "She's shy at first," she said eventually. "But once she trusts you, she talks constantly. She loves art and soccer, and she's reading at a 4th grade level even though she's only in 2nd grade. She has nightmares sometimes, especially when things are unstable. She needs routine. And she asks a lot of questions about why her life is different from other kids' lives." "Okay," I said. "She also really wants a dog, but I've never been able to afford one. And she hates Brussels sprouts, but she'll eat them if you put cheese on them. She's never been to the ocean, even though we live in Oregon, because I've never had a car reliable enough to make the drive." I realized Jennifer wasn't just telling me about Sophia. She was cataloging all the things she wished she could give her daughter but couldn't. All the experiences and comforts and small joys that felt impossible when you were just trying to keep a roof over your heads. "How long do you think you'll need?" I asked. "To get back on my feet? I don't know. 3 months, maybe 6. I have a lead on a better job, but it doesn't start until May, and even then, I'll need time to save up for a deposit on a new place." "Take as long as you need," I said. "You don't understand what you're offering." "Maybe not, but I understand what I'm saying. Take as long as you need." Jennifer started crying then, quiet tears that she wiped away with the back of her hand like she was embarrassed by them. "I never wanted this for her," she whispered. "I never wanted her to feel like she was a burden or a problem to be solved." "She's not a burden," I said. "She's a little girl who needs people in her corner. And if you'll let me, I'd like to be one of those people." That night, Marcus brought Sophia to my apartment with 2 garbage bags full of clothes and toys and a backpack with her school supplies. She stood in my doorway looking simultaneously brave and terrified, clutching a stuffed elephant that had seen better days. "Hi, Sophia," I said, kneeling down to her eye level. "I'm Rebecca. Your mom told me you might stay with me for a little while." She nodded solemnly. "Mama said you're nice." "I'm gonna try to be. Are you hungry? I made spaghetti." Her eyes lit up. "With meatballs?" "With meatballs." And just like that, my life as a mother began. Not the way I'd ever imagined it would. Not with 9 months of preparation and baby showers and careful planning. But with a 7-year-old girl sitting at my kitchen table, telling me about her teacher and her best friend, and asking if she could have seconds of everything because she was still growing, and growing kids needed lots of food. Marcus left after dinner, and I could see the relief in his face at being released from a responsibility he'd never wanted to claim. I was angry at him for that, but I was also grateful. Because if he'd been different, if he'd been the kind of man who would have stepped up from the beginning, I never would have met Sophia. And meeting Sophia, I was already beginning to realize, was going to change everything about who I thought I was and what I thought I was capable of. That first night, after I'd helped her brush her teeth and read her 2 chapters of Charlotte's Web, Sophia looked up at me from the pillow on what was now her bed and asked the question I'd been dreading. "Are you going to send me away too?" "No, sweetheart," I said, tucking the blanket around her shoulders. "Not until your mama is ready to have you back home with her. And maybe not even then, if you don't want to go." "Promise?" "I promise." She fell asleep holding my hand, and I sat there in the dark, listening to her breathe and wondering what the hell I'd gotten myself into. I'd gone from being a single woman with a neat, controlled life to being responsible for another human being in the space of 1 week. I didn't know anything about parenting. I'd never even babysat regularly as a teenager. But as I watched Sophia sleep, something settled in my chest that felt like certainty. This was right. This was where I was supposed to be. This little girl, with her serious questions and her bright smile and her way of eating spaghetti like she was afraid someone might take it away, was exactly who I was supposed to be taking care of. I just had no idea that 15 years later, she'd be the one taking care of me. The first month with Sophia was like learning to speak a language I'd never heard before. Everything I thought I knew about children came from my classroom experience. But teaching 25 kids for 6 hours a day was completely different from being responsible for 1 child for every waking moment. Sophia was polite to a fault in those early weeks. The kind of careful politeness that breaks your heart, because you realize it comes from a child who's learned that being too much trouble might mean being sent away. She would ask permission for everything. Could she have a glass of water? Could she use the bathroom? Could she turn on the television? It took me 2 weeks to convince her that she didn't need to ask before getting a snack from the kitchen, and even then, she would hover uncertainly by the refrigerator, until I noticed and encouraged her to take whatever she wanted. The nightmares Jennifer had warned me about started on the 4th night. I woke up to the sound of crying and found Sophia sitting up in bed, tears streaming down her face, calling for her mama. I sat with her until she fell back asleep, and then I lay awake until dawn, wondering if I was doing more harm than good by keeping her away from the person she really wanted. But slowly, gradually, things began to shift. Sophia started leaving her stuffed elephant, whose name was Mr. Peanuts, on the couch instead of clutching him everywhere she went. She began asking for specific cereals at the grocery store instead of just accepting whatever I put in the cart. She laughed at my terrible jokes during dinner and started telling me about her day at school without me having to ask 20 questions to extract the information. The breakthrough came 3 weeks in, on a Saturday morning when I was attempting to make pancakes from scratch. I'd never been much of a cook, but Sophia had mentioned that her mama used to make pancakes on weekend mornings, and I wanted to create some version of that tradition for her. Unfortunately, my first attempt resulted in what could generously be described as pancake-shaped disasters that were simultaneously burnt on the outside and raw in the middle. I was standing at the stove, staring at the latest catastrophe, when I heard a small giggle behind me. "Those look like elephant ears," Sophia said, and when I turned around, she was covering her mouth with her hands, eyes wide like she was afraid she'd said something wrong. "They do look like elephant ears," I agreed solemnly. "Very sick elephant ears." That made her giggle harder. "Maybe we should call it Elephant Doctor." "An elephant doctor? What would an elephant doctor do about burnt pancakes?" "Put them out of their misery?" she suggested, and then we were both laughing so hard that I had to turn off the burner before I burned the kitchen down. We ended up having cereal for breakfast that morning, but something had changed between us. Sophia had teased me, had made a joke at my expense, and the world hadn't ended. In fact, I'd laughed harder than I had in months. She'd tested the boundaries of our relationship and found them to be flexible, forgiving, built on affection rather than obligation. After that, she started talking more. Really talking, not just answering questions, or reporting the basic facts of her day. She told me about her best friend Kayla at school, who had 2 different colored eyes and collected rocks. She explained the complex social dynamics of second-grade lunch tables and why the swing set was better than the jungle gym. She shared her theories about why her teacher, Mrs. Patterson, wore the same cardigan every Tuesday. I found myself looking forward to these conversations more than I'd looked forward to anything in a long time. Sophia had a way of seeing the world that was both innocent and surprisingly perceptive. She noticed things that adults missed and asked questions that made me think about familiar concepts in entirely new ways. "Why do grown-ups always say 'we'll see' when they mean no?" she asked one afternoon while we were walking through the park near my apartment. "Do we do that? Mama used to say 'we'll see' about getting a dog, and about going to Disneyland, and about lots of stuff that never happened. And my friend Tyler's mom says 'we'll see' about sleepovers and new bikes and everything Tyler really wants." I thought about that for a moment. Maybe grown-ups say "we'll see" because they want to say yes, but they're not sure if they can make it happen. Maybe it's easier than disappointing someone right away. "But it's still disappointing," Sophia pointed out. "It's just disappointing later instead of disappointing now." She was right, of course. And I made a mental note to be more honest with her, even when honesty meant saying things she didn't want to hear. The truth was, I was falling in love with this child in a way that scared me. Not romantic love, obviously, but something deeper and more consuming than I'd ever experienced. When she was at school, I found myself thinking about what she might want for dinner, or whether she'd had a good day, or if she was making friends. When she was home, I caught myself watching her while she did her homework or colored pictures, marveling at her concentration and the serious expression she got when she was trying to figure something out. Marcus called every few weeks, usually when his guilt got the better of him, but his conversations with Sophia were stilted and awkward. He didn't know how to talk to her about her life, didn't know the names of her friends or her favorite subjects in school. He would ask generic questions and give generic responses to her answers, and I could see Sophia's enthusiasm dim a little more with each phone call. "Why doesn't Daddy want to see me?" she asked one evening after a particularly painful 10-minute conversation where Marcus had spent most of the time talking about his graduate program. I chose my words carefully. "I think your daddy loves you very much, but I also think he doesn't know how to be a good father. Some people aren't good at being parents, even when they want to be. Are you good at being a parent?" The question caught me off guard. "I don't know. What do you think?" She considered this seriously. "I think you're learning, like how I'm learning multiplication. You don't know all the answers yet, but you're trying really hard, and you don't get mad when you make mistakes." It was the most insightful thing anyone had ever said about my parenting, and it came from a 7-year-old who'd been living with me for barely a month. Jennifer visited every weekend, and those visits were both wonderful and heartbreaking to witness. Sophia would light up the moment her mother walked through the door, chattering excitedly about everything she'd done during the week, showing off homework assignments and art projects. Jennifer would listen with the kind of focused attention that only comes from a parent who's been separated from their child, memorizing every detail as if she were afraid she might forget. But I could also see the strain in Jennifer's face, the way she watched Sophia interact with me, the careful questions she asked about our routines in our relationship. She was grateful for what I was providing for her daughter, but she was also threatened by it, and I understood that completely. No parent wants to see their child bonding with someone else, even when that bonding is necessary and beneficial. "She seems happy," Jennifer said one Sunday afternoon while Sophia was in her room, gathering toys to show her mother. "She is happy," I said. "But she misses you terribly. She talks about you every day." "What does she say?" "She tells me about things you used to do together, the songs you would sing, the way you would braid her hair. She's keeping all of those memories safe until she can come home to you." Jennifer's eyes filled with tears. "I got the job," she said quietly. "The one I interviewed for. It starts next month." "That's wonderful news. It means I can start looking for a new place to live. Maybe by summer, if I can save enough for a deposit." Summer was still 3 months away. 3 more months of having Sophia in my life, in my home, in my heart. 3 more months of bedtime stories and homework help and weekend adventures. 3 more months of feeling like I had a purpose that went beyond just taking care of myself. "There's no rush," I said, and I meant it. "You can take as long as you need to find the right place." "You've been so good to her," Jennifer said, "to both of us." "I don't know how to thank you." "You don't need to thank me. She's been good to me too." And it was true. Sophia had changed my life in ways I was just beginning to understand. My apartment, which had always felt perfectly sized for one person, now felt like a home. My evenings, which I'd spent grading papers or watching television, were now filled with conversations and games and the kind of laughter that comes from sharing small moments with someone you love. My weekends, once devoted to errands and solitude, had become adventures in parenting, opportunities to see the world through a child's eyes. I was also discovering strengths I didn't know I had. When Sophia came down with the flu in her 2nd month with me, I didn't panic. I called in sick to work, made soup from scratch, and spent 3 days reading stories and monitoring her fever, and learning that there's a particular kind of exhaustion that comes from worrying about someone else's well-being more than your own. When she had trouble with a group of older kids on the playground who were teasing her about her second-hand clothes, I didn't just comfort her. I taught her strategies for standing up for herself and helped her practice responses that were confident without being confrontational. But it was the smaller moments that really shaped our relationship. The way she would unconsciously reach for my hand when we were crossing the street. The way she started bringing me her drawings before anyone else got to see them. The way she would curl up next to me on the couch during movie nights, fitting perfectly under my arm like she'd been designed to belong there. One evening in April, while we were working on a school project about families, Sophia looked up at me with the serious expression she got when she was working through something complicated. Rebecca? Yes? If Mama gets a new apartment and I go back to live with her, will I still be able to see you? The question hit me like a physical blow. In all the weeks of caring for Sophia, of falling in love with her and building a life that included her, I hadn't really allowed myself to think about what would happen when Jennifer was ready to take her back. I'd been living day by day, focused on the immediate needs and joys of our situation, not on the inevitable ending. Of course you will, I said, though I had no idea if that was true. We're family now, aren't we? Are we? I think so, don't you? She nodded emphatically. I think so too. That night, after Sophia was asleep, I sat at my kitchen table and really confronted what I was facing. I loved this child, not just cared for her, not just felt responsible for her, but loved her with a fierce, protective, unconditional love that I'd never experienced before. The thought of her leaving, of going back to a life where I wasn't part of her daily routine, where I wouldn't be there to help with homework, or kiss scraped knees, or listen to her theories about the world, was almost unbearable. But I also knew that Jennifer was Sophia's real mother, and that the goal had always been reunification. Jennifer was working hard to rebuild her life, to create a stable home for her daughter. It would be selfish and wrong for me to hope for anything other than their successful reunion, even if it meant my own heartbreak. What I didn't know was how to prepare Sophia for that transition, or how to prepare myself. How do you say goodbye to someone who's become the center of your world? How do you go back to a life that suddenly feels empty and purposeless after months of it feeling rich and meaningful? These were the questions that kept me awake that night, and many nights after. But during the days, I pushed them aside and focused on being present for Sophia, on making the most of whatever time we had left together. I took her to the zoo and to children's museums and to the beach, finally fulfilling Jennifer's wish that her daughter see the ocean. I helped her plant a small garden in pots on my apartment balcony, teaching her about seeds and soil and patience. I enrolled her in a weekend art class where she could explore her creative interests with other children who shared her passion for drawing and painting. Every experience we shared felt precious and temporary, like I was collecting memories to sustain me through whatever came next. But I tried not to let that awareness shadow our time together. Sophia deserved to have her childhood experiences be about joy and discovery, not about my anxiety about our future. And there were so many joyful moments. The afternoon she learned to ride a two-wheel bicycle, wobbly and triumphant in the parking lot behind my building. The evening she cooked dinner for me, an elaborate meal of peanut butter and jelly sandwiches, cut into star shapes and apple slices, arranged in a smiley face. The morning she woke up early to surprise me with breakfast in bed, cereal and orange juice served on my best dishes with a hand-drawn placemat that read, "Best Rebecca ever." By late spring, Sophia had been with me for nearly 4 months, and our life together had found a rhythm that felt natural and sustainable. She had friends in the neighborhood, a routine at school, activities she enjoyed. She still missed her mother and looked forward to their weekend visits, but she'd also built a life in my apartment that was fully hers. Her artwork covered the refrigerator, her books filled a shelf in the living room, her favorite mug had a permanent place in the kitchen cabinet. Jennifer's new job was going well, and she'd found an apartment she could afford in a neighborhood with good schools. The reunion I'd been dreading was finally on the horizon, scheduled for early June when the school year ended. It made practical sense. Sophia would spend the summer getting reacquainted with living with her mother, and then start 3rd grade in her new school district in the fall. But as the date approached, I found myself struggling with emotions I hadn't expected. Along with the sadness I'd anticipated, I was also experiencing something that felt dangerously close to resentment. Not toward Sophia, and not exactly toward Jennifer, but toward the situation itself. Why should I have to give up this child I'd grown to love? Why should our family, because that's what we'd become, be broken up just because biology and law said that Jennifer had a greater claim to Sophia than I did? These were ugly thoughts, and I was ashamed of them. I knew they came from a place of love, but they were also selfish and unfair. Jennifer was a good mother who'd been dealt a difficult hand. She deserved to have her daughter back, and Sophia deserved to be with her biological parent, who loved her and had worked hard to create a stable home for her. But knowing something intellectually and accepting it emotionally are two different things. And as June approached, I found myself grieving not just for the loss of Sophia, but for the loss of the person I'd become while caring for her. Being her guardian had awakened something in me that I'd never known existed, a capacity for selfless love and fierce protectiveness that had made me feel more complete than I'd ever felt in my adult life. The night before Sophia was scheduled to move back with Jennifer, she came into my room carrying Mr. Peanuts and wearing the serious expression that meant she had something important to discuss. "I don't want to leave," she said simply. "I know, sweetheart. Change is hard, even when it's good change. But I want to stay with you. Can't I stay with you and visit Mama on weekends instead?" My heart broke and mended and broke again, all in the space of a few seconds. This child, who I'd tried so hard to prepare for reunion with her mother, wanted to stay with me. She'd found something in our life together that she didn't want to give up, just as I had. "Oh, Sophia," I said, pulling her onto my bed and wrapping my arms around her. "I would love for you to stay with me forever, but your mama has been working so hard to make a good home for you, and she's missed you so much. She needs you back. But what about you? Won't you miss me?" "More than you can imagine. But missing someone doesn't mean you can't love them. I'll always love you, no matter where you live or how much time passes between when I see you. Promise?" "I promise." She fell asleep in my bed that night, curled up against my side like she was trying to memorize the feeling of being safe and loved. I lay awake watching her sleep, memorizing everything about her that I could. The way her hair fell across her face, the small scar on her chin from a playground accident during her first week with me, the way she held Mr. Peanuts even in sleep. Tomorrow she would start a new chapter of her life, and I would have to figure out how to write the next chapter of mine. But tonight, she was still mine to love and protect, and that had to be enough. The transition back to Jennifer's apartment went more smoothly than any of us had expected. Sophia was excited to be reunited with her mother, and Jennifer had created a beautiful space for her daughter in their new 2-bedroom place in Southeast Portland. The apartment was bright and clean, with a small balcony that overlooked a community garden, and windows that let in the kind of natural light that had been missing from their previous cramped studio. I helped them move Sophia's belongings on a warm Saturday morning in June, carrying boxes of books and toys and clothes that had accumulated during our months together. Jennifer had insisted I keep some of Sophia's artwork, the pieces she was most proud of, saying they belonged with me as much as they belonged with her. I hung them in my kitchen that evening, and my apartment felt both more complete and more empty than it had in months. We established a routine quickly. Sophia would spend every other weekend with me, and we'd have dinner together one evening during the week. It wasn't the same as living together, but it was more than I dared to hope for when she first moved back with Jennifer. The three of us had somehow figured out how to be an unconventional family, bound not by blood or law but by love and shared history, and a mutual commitment to Sophia's well-being. Summer passed in a blur of activities and adventures. I took Sophia to Powell's Books for the first time, watching her eyes widen at the sheer volume of stories contained in one building. We spent afternoons at Laurelhurst Park, feeding ducks and climbing trees and reading on blankets in the shade. Jennifer joined us sometimes, and those were my favorite days, when we felt like a complete unit rather than a carefully coordinated custody arrangement. Sophia started 3rd grade in September, and the adjustment to her new school was easier than any of us had anticipated. She made friends quickly, as she always had, and her teacher, Mrs. Rodriguez, recognized her artistic talents and encouraged her to participate in the school's art program. She was thriving in ways that made all the upheaval and uncertainty of the previous year feel worthwhile. But it was during one of our weekday dinners in late October that I first sensed something was troubling Jennifer. She seemed distracted, picking at her food and letting Sophia carry most of the conversation. When I asked if everything was okay, she gave me the kind of bright, forced smile that adults use when they're trying to protect children from their worries. "Just work stuff," she said, but I could tell there was more to it than that. After dinner, while Sophia was in the living room working on a puzzle, Jennifer asked if we could talk privately in the kitchen. Her hands were shaking slightly as she poured herself a cup of coffee, and she couldn't quite meet my eyes. "Rebecca, I need to tell you something," she said quietly. About Marcus. About why I really let Sophia stay with you. I felt a chill run down my spine. What do you mean? Jennifer took a deep breath. When Marcus told me about you, about how you'd broken up with him but still wanted to help Sophia, I thought it was too good to be true. I mean, who does that? Who takes in their ex's secret daughter? I was desperate, but I wasn't stupid. I wanted to know more about you before I trusted you with my child. She paused, wrapping her hands around her coffee mug like she was trying to warm herself. So I did some research. I looked you up online, asked around, even drove by the school where you teach and watched you with your students during recess. I needed to know if you were who Marcus said you were, or if this was some kind of elaborate manipulation. That's understandable, I said, though I was starting to feel uneasy about where this conversation was heading. What I found out, Jennifer continued, was that you were exactly who Marcus said you were. A good teacher, well-liked by parents and students. No criminal record, no red flags. But I also found out something else, something Marcus never told you. My heart started beating faster. What? Marcus didn't just have a relationship with me in college, Rebecca. We were married. The words hit me like a physical blow. Married. Marcus had been married to Jennifer, not just in a relationship with her. Which meant he was still married to you when we were together, I said slowly. Jennifer nodded miserably. We never divorced. We separated when Sophia was 2, and Marcus moved out, but we never made it official. He said it was too expensive, too complicated, that we'd deal with it later when one of us wanted to remarry. But then years passed, and later never came. I sat down heavily in the nearest chair, trying to process what she was telling me. Marcus hadn't just hidden his daughter from me, he'd hidden his wife. Our entire relationship, our engagement, the life we'd planned together, it had all been built on a lie even bigger than I'd realized. So when he wanted to marry you, Jennifer continued, he would have had to divorce me first. And that would have meant revealing not just that he had a daughter, but that he'd been lying about his entire relationship history. Why are you telling me this now? I asked. Because there's more. Jennifer's voice was barely above a whisper. Marcus came to see me last week. He wants to get back together. I stared at her. What? He says he's realized what's important, that losing you made him understand he needs to be a better father, a better husband. He wants us to be a real family, him and me and Sophia. And what did you tell him? I told him I needed to think about it. Jennifer finally looked directly at me, and I could see the conflict in her eyes. Rebecca, he's changed. Or at least, he says he has. He's finished his master's program. He's got a good job now. He can provide for us in ways he couldn't before. And Sophia, she's always wanted a normal family, with both her parents together. I felt like the world was tilting sideways. Do you love him? I don't know. I used to. Maybe I still do, somewhere underneath all the hurt and disappointment. But it's not just about what I want anymore. It's about what's best for Sophia. And do you think that's Marcus? I think she deserves the chance to have her father in her life consistently, not just on weekends and phone calls. I think she deserves to know what it feels like to have both her parents under the same roof, working together to take care of her. I understood what Jennifer was saying, and part of me even agreed with it. Every child deserves to have loving, present parents if possible. But I also knew Marcus in ways that Jennifer might have forgotten during their years apart. I knew how easily he made promises and how quickly he broke them when they became inconvenient. Have you talked to Sophia about this? Not yet. I wanted to talk to you first because… Jennifer trailed off, looking uncomfortable. Because what? Because if Marcus and I get back together, really get back together, our situation is going to change. The way we've been sharing Sophia, the way you've been part of her life, it's not going to work anymore. The implication hung in the air between us like a toxic cloud. If Jennifer reconciled with Marcus, I would lose Sophia. Not gradually, not partially, but completely. Marcus would never allow his wife to maintain a relationship with his ex-fiancé, especially not one that involved his daughter. It would be too complicated, too threatening to the illusion of the perfect family he was trying to create. I see, I said quietly. Rebecca, I can't tell you how grateful I am for everything you've done for us. You saved Sophia when we needed saving, and you've been more generous and loving than anyone had a right to expect. But she's my daughter, and if there's a chance for her to have the kind of stable, traditional family that I could never give her on my own. You don't need to explain, I said, though my voice sounded strange and distant to my own ears. I understand. But I didn't understand, not really. How could Jennifer even consider trusting Marcus again after everything he'd done? How could she risk Sophia's emotional well-being on the possibility that a man who'd spent 7 years avoiding his responsibilities had suddenly become reliable? How could she be willing to cut me out of Sophia's life after everything we'd been through together? The logical part of my brain knew that these weren't fair questions. Jennifer was Sophia's mother, and she had every right to make decisions about what was best for her daughter. She had every right to pursue a relationship with her husband if she thought it would benefit their family. And she had every right to prioritize her nuclear family over the complicated extended arrangement we'd created. But the emotional part of my brain, the part that had fallen completely in love with a little girl who called me on the phone every night before bed just to say goodnight, was screaming in protest. Sophia wasn't just Jennifer's daughter anymore. She was mine too, in every way that mattered except biology and law. I'd earned the right to be part of her life through months of midnight fevers and homework struggles and bedtime stories. I'd earned it through loving her unconditionally and putting her needs before my own desires. How long do I have? I asked. Marcus wants an answer by Thanksgiving. If I say yes, he wants to move back in, right, after the holidays so we can start the new year as a family. Thanksgiving was 3 weeks away. 3 weeks to prepare myself for losing Sophia again, this time permanently. 3 weeks to figure out how to say goodbye to the most important relationship in my life. Does Sophia know any of this? She knows that Marcus has been visiting more often, and she's been asking questions about why Daddy doesn't live with us. But no, she doesn't know about the possibility of us getting back together. You need to be careful how you handle this, I said, and I was surprised by how steady my voice sounded despite the chaos in my head. She's created a life that includes me, and if you're going to take that away from her, you need to prepare her gradually. You can't just announce one day that she's never going to see me again. I know, Jennifer said softly. I've been thinking about that too. Have you been thinking about what happens if Marcus changes his mind again? If he decides that being a full-time father is harder than he expected? If he meets someone new and decides he wants a different kind of life? Jennifer's face tightened. He's not going to change his mind. How can you be sure? Because he's grown up. Because he's learned from his mistakes. Because he wants to be the kind of man Sophia can be proud of. I wanted to argue with her, to point out that people don't usually change as fundamentally as she was suggesting, that Marcus had already proven himself to be unreliable in the most important moments. But I could see in her face that she'd already made her decision, even if she wasn't ready to admit it yet. She wanted to believe in Marcus, wanted to believe in the possibility of the happy ending she'd dreamed of since Sophia was born. The rest of our dinner was stilted and awkward. Sophia, picking up on the tension between the adults, became unusually quiet and kept looking back and forth between Jennifer and me like she was trying to solve a puzzle. When it was time for me to leave, she hugged me longer than usual and made me promise to call her before bedtime, which I always did anyway. Driving home that night, I felt like I was drowning in anger and grief and fear, all mixed together into something toxic and overwhelming. I'd thought the worst thing that could happen was Sophia moving back with Jennifer, and our relationship changing from daily to weekly contact. I'd never imagined that I could lose her completely, that I could go from being one of the most important people in her life to being a stranger she used to know. But even worse than my own heartbreak was the thought of what this might do to Sophia. She trusted me. She believed me when I promised that we were family, that nothing could change the love between us. How would she understand being told that she couldn't see me anymore? How would she process the message that adult relationships were more important than the bond we'd built? When I got home, my apartment felt like a mausoleum. Sophia's artwork still covered my refrigerator, her favorite books were still on the shelf in my living room, and her toothbrush was still in the bathroom from her last weekend visit. If Jennifer married Marcus, all of these things would become relics of a relationship that was no longer allowed to exist. I called my sister Diana that night, something I rarely did because we'd never been particularly close. But I needed to talk to someone who wasn't involved in the situation, someone who could help me think through my options. "Let me understand this," Diana said after I'd explained the whole complicated story. "You want to fight for custody of a child who isn't biologically yours, against her biological mother who wants to reunite with the child's biological father? When you put it like that, it sounds insane." "It doesn't sound insane, it sounds heartbreaking. But, Rebecca, what exactly do you think you can do here? You have no legal rights to Sophia. Jennifer could cut off your relationship tomorrow if she wanted to, with or without Marcus in the picture. I know that, but she wouldn't want to hurt Sophia like that. Wouldn't she? Or wouldn't she convince herself that it's for Sophia's own good? That it's better for her to have a clean break and focus on her nuclear family?" Diana was right, and I knew it. I had no leverage in this situation, no way to fight for Sophia that wouldn't ultimately hurt her more than it helped. If I tried to convince Jennifer that Marcus was untrustworthy, I would sound jealous and vindictive. If I tried to appeal to Sophia directly, I would be putting her in the impossible position of choosing between the adults she loved. If I involved lawyers or social services, I would be creating trauma and instability in her life, exactly the opposite of what she needed. "So I just give up?" I asked. "You accept that you can't control this situation, and you focus on making whatever time you have left with Sophia as meaningful as possible. You make sure she knows how much you love her, and you trust that love to sustain your relationship even if you can't see her regularly." It was good advice, but it felt completely inadequate to the enormity of what I was facing. How do you prepare to lose someone who's become essential to your sense of purpose and identity? How do you say goodbye to a relationship that's transformed you in ways you're still discovering? Over the next few days, I found myself watching Sophia more carefully during our time together, trying to memorize everything about her that I could. The way she hummed while she colored, the way she narrated her own actions when she thought no one was listening, the way she always asked for just 5 more minutes whenever it was time to leave. I was already grieving our relationship even though it hadn't ended yet, already missing her, even though she was still right there. Sophia, with the emotional intelligence that children sometimes have in abundance, seemed to sense that something was wrong. She asked me repeatedly if I was okay, if I was sick, if I was sad about something. I told her I was fine, that I was just tired from work, but I don't think she believed me. The breaking point came during our weekend together in mid-November. Sophia had been unusually clingy all day, following me from room to room and insisting on helping with every mundane task, from folding laundry to washing dishes. At bedtime, she asked if she could sleep in my bed, something she hadn't done since her first week with me months earlier. "I had a bad dream," she said when I asked what was wrong. "Do you want to tell me about it?" She was quiet for a long time, curled up against my side in the dark. Then, in a very small voice, she said, "I dreamed that you went away and forgot about me." My heart shattered into 1,000 pieces. Somehow, despite all our efforts to keep adult problems away from her, Sophia had picked up on the undercurrents of change and uncertainty. She was already afraid of losing me, already preparing herself for abandonment. "Sweetheart," I said, "I could never forget about you. Even if we couldn't see each other for a very long time, I would remember everything about you and love you just as much. But what if you get a new little girl to take care of, and you like her better?" "That's not how love works," I said, though I was crying now and hoping she couldn't tell. "Love isn't like pizza, where you only have so many slices to give out. Love is like a candle, where you can light as many other candles as you want without your flame getting any smaller. You will always have all of my love, no matter what else happens in my life." She fell asleep eventually, but I lay awake all night thinking about her nightmare and my promise. How could I tell her that her bad dream might actually come true? How could I prepare her for the possibility that our relationship was about to end without terrifying her, or making her feel responsible for adult decisions she had no control over? The next morning, over breakfast, Sophia looked at me with the serious expression that meant she was working through something important. "Rebecca?" "Yes?" "If something happened and I couldn't live with you or Mama, would you still want me?" The question came out of nowhere and hit me like a truck. Where had this fear come from? What had she overheard or intuited that made her worry about being unwanted? "Sophia," I said, kneeling down so we were eye level, "there is nothing that could happen that would make me not want you in my life. You are stuck with me forever, whether you like it or not." She smiled, but there was still something worried in her eyes. "Even if I was bad? Even if you were bad, which you never are? Even if Daddy said you couldn't see me anymore?" My blood ran cold. Had she overheard something? Had Jennifer or Marcus said something in front of her without realizing she was listening? Has someone said that might happen? "No," she said quickly, but she was looking down at her cereal bowl instead of at me. "I just wondered." I spent the rest of that weekend trying to reassure Sophia without directly addressing fears that she might not even consciously recognize. We made a photo album together, pictures from our time living together, and all the adventures we'd had since she moved back with Jennifer. We wrote letters to our future selves, to be opened in 5 years, full of inside jokes and shared memories. We planted tulip bulbs in pots on my balcony, flowers that would bloom in the spring whether we were together to see them or not. When I took her back to Jennifer's apartment on Sunday evening, both Jennifer and Marcus were there. Marcus looked older than I remembered, more settled somehow, but there was still something in his eyes that reminded me why I'd fallen in love with him in the first place. He was charming and attentive to Sophia, asking about her weekend and listening to her chatter about our activities with apparent genuine interest. But I could also see the calculation behind his behavior, the way he was performing the role of devoted father for Jennifer's benefit. This was Marcus trying to prove that he'd changed, that he could be the kind of man and father that Jennifer wanted him to be. Whether this performance could become reality over the long term remained to be seen. "Rebecca," he said as I was preparing to leave, "thank you for taking such good care of Sophia. Jennifer's told me how much you've done for them both." "It's been my pleasure," I said carefully. "I hope we can all work together to make sure Sophia has everything she needs going forward." There was something in the way he said it that made me think he was offering me an olive branch, a possibility that maybe I wouldn't be completely cut out of Sophia's life if he and Jennifer reunited. But I also knew Marcus well enough to recognize when he was saying what he thought people wanted to hear versus what he actually meant. That night, Jennifer called me after Sophia was in bed. "I've made my decision," she said, without preamble. "I'm going to say yes to Marcus." Even though I'd been expecting this, hearing it stated so definitively felt like a punch to the gut. "When?" "I'm going to tell him tomorrow night. If everything goes well, he'll move back in over Christmas break, so Sophia can adjust to having him here before school starts again." "And what about me?" There was a long pause. "Marcus thinks it would be better if we kept things simple for a while, just while we're all adjusting to being a family again. Maybe in a few months, once we found our rhythm, we can talk about occasional visits." Occasional visits. After being one of the primary caregivers in Sophia's life for almost a year, I was being relegated to occasional visits. And even those weren't guaranteed, just something they might consider if it was convenient for their new family dynamic. Does Sophia know? I'm going to tell her this week. I want to give her time to adjust to the idea before Marcus actually moves in. "Jennifer," I said, and I could hear the desperation creeping into my voice despite my efforts to stay calm. "Please think about this carefully. Sophia has built her life around having both you and me in it. Taking that away from her suddenly is going to feel like punishment for something she didn't do." "I know it's hard," Jennifer said, "but sometimes being a parent means making difficult decisions that might hurt in the short term but are better in the long term. Sophia needs stability, and she needs to bond with her father without the confusion of having too many parental figures in her life. I'm not trying to be a parental figure. I'm trying to be someone who loves her. But don't you see how that's the same thing? Don't you see how confusing it is for her to have someone who isn't her parent acting like a parent?" I wanted to argue, to point out that there were lots of ways to love a child without undermining their relationship with their biological parents. I wanted to remind Jennifer that she'd been grateful for my involvement when she needed help, that she'd encouraged the bond between Sophia and me when it was convenient for her situation. But I could hear in her voice that she'd already justified this decision to herself, already found a way to frame it as being in Sophia's best interests rather than in Marcus's best interests, or her own desire for a traditional family structure. "When do I say goodbye to her?" "Christmas Eve," Jennifer said quietly. "Marcus is moving in on Christmas Day, and we think it would be easier for everyone if you had your last visit before then." Christmas Eve. I had 5 weeks left with Sophia. 5 weeks to figure out how to say goodbye to the most important relationship of my adult life. 5 weeks to prepare her for losing someone she loved, without making her feel responsible or abandoned. 5 weeks to figure out how to rebuild my life around the Sophia-shaped hole that was about to be torn through the center of it. The 5 weeks between Jennifer's decision and Christmas Eve passed in a haze of forced normalcy and underlying dread. I continued our regular routine of weeknight dinners and weekend visits. But everything felt different now, shadowed by the knowledge that each moment together was numbered. I found myself taking mental photographs of ordinary moments, trying to capture the way Sophia's face lit up when she solved a math problem, the sound of her laughter during our Saturday morning pancake attempts, the weight of her hand in mine as we walked through the neighborhood. Sophia knew something was changing, even though Jennifer hadn't told her yet about Marcus moving back in. Children are remarkably perceptive when it comes to adult emotions, and despite our best efforts to act normal, both Jennifer and I were carrying a tension that was impossible to completely hide. Sophia became more clingy during our visits, more reluctant to leave when it was time to go back to her mother's apartment, more prone to asking questions about our future plans together. "Are we still going to go to the Butterfly Conservatory next month?" she asked during one of our dinners, referring to a trip we'd been planning since October. "We'll see, sweetheart," I said, and immediately hated myself for using the exact phrase she'd once criticized adults for using when they meant no. "You said, 'we'll see,'" she pointed out. "That usually means something's not going to happen." I looked at this wise, observant 8-year-old and felt my heart break a little more. You're right. I shouldn't have said that. The truth is, I don't know what's going to happen next month, but I hope we can still go to see the butterflies together. Why don't you know? Because sometimes grown-ups have to make decisions that affect other people, and those decisions take time to figure out. It was the most honest answer I could give her, without betraying Jennifer's confidence, or forcing Sophia to carry adult knowledge before her mother was ready to share it. Jennifer finally told Sophia about Marcus moving back in during the first week of December. She called me that evening, her voice strained and exhausted, to tell me how it had gone. "She cried," Jennifer said simply, "not because she doesn't want Marcus to live with us, but because she's worried about what it means for everyone else in her life, especially you." "What did you tell her?" "I told her that having Marcus live with us didn't mean she would stop seeing you, just that things might be different for a while." I couldn't bring myself to tell her the whole truth yet. "Jennifer, you have to prepare her. You can't just spring it on her at the last minute that our relationship is ending." "I know, I will. I just need a little more time to figure out how to explain it in a way that won't devastate her." But as the days passed, it became clear that Jennifer was struggling to find the words, or perhaps the courage, to tell Sophia the full truth about what Marcus's return would mean for our relationship. Meanwhile, Marcus had started spending more time at the apartment, ostensibly to help Sophia adjust to his increased presence. But I suspected it was also to establish his territory and his role as the primary male figure in Sophia's life. I encountered him during one of my weeknight dinner visits, arriving just as he was leaving after helping Sophia with her homework. The interaction was polite but tense, both of us aware that we were essentially competing for space in Sophia's life. "She's a remarkable kid," Marcus said as we stood in the hallway outside Jennifer's apartment. "She is. Jennifer told me how much you've done for them both. I want you to know I'm grateful." "Are you?" He looked surprised by the directness of my question. "Of course. You stepped in when Sophia needed help, and you've been a positive influence in her life." "But now you want me to step back out." Marcus's diplomatic smile faltered slightly. "I want what's best for my family. And what's best for my family is stability, consistency, clear boundaries about who the adults in charge are." "And you think I threaten that stability?" "I think having too many people playing parental roles can be confusing for a child. I think Sophia needs to understand that Jennifer and I are her parents, and while other adults might care about her, we're the ones responsible for her well-being and her future." There it was. the fundamental disagreement that couldn't be negotiated or compromised on. Marcus saw parenthood as a role defined by biology and legal status, something exclusive and hierarchical. I saw it as something that could be shared, something that expanded rather than diminished when more people loved a child. We were never going to agree on this, which meant one of us was going to have to give way completely. Since Marcus held all the legal and social advantages, I knew it wouldn't be him. 2 weeks before Christmas, Sophia asked me directly about the rumors she'd been hearing from other adults in her life. Kayla's mom said that when parents get back together, sometimes kids can't see their friends as much anymore. Is that true? We were decorating sugar cookies at my kitchen table, a tradition we'd established the previous Christmas when she was still living with me. Sophia was carefully applying green frosting to a tree-shaped cookie, her tongue poking out slightly in concentration. Why would Kayla's mom say something like that? Because she knows that Daddy is moving back in with me and Mama, and she asked if that meant I wouldn't be coming to your house anymore. My hands stilled on the cookie I was decorating. Some well-meaning adult had essentially forced this conversation before Jennifer or I were ready for it, and now I had to figure out how to respond honestly without overstepping my boundaries or contradicting whatever Jennifer might have already told her. "What do you think it means?" I asked. "I think it means adults are weird and make things complicated when they don't need to be," Sophia said matter-of-factly. "I think I should be able to see everyone I love, even if some of them live in the same house and some of them don't." That sounds very reasonable to me. But it's not up to me, is it? The question was so direct, so clear-eyed, that I felt tears start to form in my eyes. How had this 8-year-old developed such a sophisticated understanding of adult power dynamics? How had she learned so young that her own desires and needs might not be the most important factors in decisions about her life? "No, sweetheart, it's not up to you. But your feelings and your happiness are very important to all the adults who love you, and we're all trying to figure out how to make decisions that will be good for you. Even if those decisions make me sad? Sometimes grown-ups have to make decisions that might make someone sad in the short term, if they think those decisions will make things better in the long term. But that doesn't mean your sadness doesn't matter, or that we don't care about how you feel." Sophia considered this while adding silver sprinkles to her cookie. "Can I tell you something? Always. I don't want Daddy to live with us if it means I can't see you anymore. I know that makes me a bad daughter, but I don't care. I want everyone I love to stay in my life." My heart shattered completely. This beautiful, loving child was already blaming herself for the impossible situation the adults in her life had created. She was already deciding that she was bad for wanting to maintain relationships that brought her joy and stability. "Sophia, listen to me very carefully. You are not a bad daughter. You are not bad for wanting to keep the people you love in your life. And you are not responsible for the decisions that adults make, even when those decisions affect you. But if I told Mama that I don't want you to go away, maybe she would change her mind. Maybe she would. But you shouldn't have to choose between the people you love. That's not fair to you, and it's not your job to fix the situation. Then whose job is it? It's the job of all the adults who love you to figure out how to share you in a way that makes you feel safe and happy and loved. Are you going to fight for me?" The question stopped me cold. Was I going to fight for her? Did I even have the right to fight for her when I wasn't her legal guardian? When doing so might create more instability in her life? When it might force her to choose sides in a conflict between the adults she cared about? "I'm going to do everything I can to make sure you know how much I love you, and that our relationship continues in whatever way possible." That's not the same thing as fighting for me. She was right, of course. It wasn't the same thing. Fighting for her would mean challenging Jennifer's decisions, possibly involving lawyers or social services. Definitely creating drama and conflict that would ultimately hurt Sophia more than help her. But not fighting for her felt like abandoning her. Like accepting that love and history and emotional bonds mattered less than biology and marriage certificates. That night, I called my sister Diana again, desperate for perspective from someone outside the situation. She asked if I was going to fight for her. I told Diana. An 8-year-old asked me if I was going to fight for her, and I didn't know what to say. What do you think fighting for her would look like? I don't know. Maybe trying to get some kind of legal visitation rights? Maybe documenting how important our relationship is to her emotional well-being? Maybe making a case that cutting me off completely would be harmful to her? And then what? You drag Jennifer and Marcus to court, create a legal battle that puts Sophia in the middle, force her to testify about which adults she wants to spend time with? You turn her family reunion into a custody war? When you put it like that, it sounds terrible. It is terrible. But so is losing her completely. Rebecca, there's no good answer here. Every choice you make is going to hurt someone, including Sophia. So what do I do? You do what you think you can live with. And you do what you think will cause Sophia the least long-term damage, even if it breaks your heart. I spent that weekend thinking about Diana's words, trying to weigh the potential consequences of different approaches. If I fought for legal visitation rights, I would be essentially declaring war on Jennifer and Marcus, ensuring that any future relationship I had with Sophia would be conducted in an atmosphere of hostility and resentment. If I accepted their decision, gracefully, I would be abandoning a child who was counting on me to advocate for her, sending the message that adult convenience was more important than her emotional needs. But there was a third option, one that I'd been avoiding because it felt manipulative and underhanded. I could document everything I knew about Marcus's history of abandoning responsibility, his pattern of making promises he couldn't keep, his tendency to prioritize his own comfort over his daughter's needs. I could build a case that he was likely to hurt Sophia again, and that cutting me off would leave her without a crucial support system when that happened. The problem with this approach was that it would require me to actively undermine Sophia's relationship with her father, to plant seeds of doubt and suspicion that might prevent her from ever fully trusting him. Even if I was right about Marcus's character, even if he did eventually disappoint her again, was it worth poisoning her chance at a relationship with him just to protect my own access to her? On the Saturday before Christmas, I made a decision that surprised even me. Instead of having our usual weekend together, I asked Jennifer if I could take Sophia somewhere special, just the two of us, for what might be our last extended time together. "Where do you want to go?" Jennifer asked, and I could hear the guilt in her voice. She knew this was goodbye, and she knew how much it was costing both Sophia and me. The coast. She's always wanted to build a real sandcastle, not just play in the sandbox at the park. I thought we could drive out to Cannon Beach, spend the day by the ocean. Jennifer was quiet for a long time. "Rebecca, are you planning to tell her about Christmas Eve being your last visit?" "I think she already knows," I said. "I think she's known for weeks that something final is coming. I want to give her a chance to ask questions and say whatever she needs to say without worrying about protecting anyone's feelings. And if she asks you to help her run away, if she begs you to fight for her, if she asks you to take her home with you and never bring her back, then I'll tell her the truth, that I love her enough to do what's best for her, even when what's best for her hurts me, and that sometimes what's best for her means staying with her parents, even when she wishes things could be different." The drive to the coast took 2 hours, and Sophia chattered excitedly for the first hour about the sandcastle we were going to build and the shells she hoped to find. But as we got closer to the ocean, she grew quieter, more thoughtful, and finally asked the question I'd been expecting. "This is goodbye, isn't it?" I glanced at her in the rearview mirror. She was looking out the window at the passing landscape, but I could see her reflection in the glass, and her expression was older than her 8 years. "What makes you think that?" "Because you've been taking pictures of everything we do together lately. Because you keep hugging me longer than normal. Because Mama has been crying when she thinks I'm not looking. Because Daddy keeps asking me questions about you, like he's trying to figure out how much I care about you." I pulled the car over at the next scenic viewpoint, a small parking area overlooking the Pacific. We sat there for a moment, watching the waves crash against the rocks below, both of us gathering courage for a conversation neither of us wanted to have. "Yes," I said finally. "After Christmas Eve, your daddy is going to move back in with you and your mama, and they think it would be better if you focused on being a family with them for a while. Without you. Without me." Sophia was quiet for a long time, processing this information. Then she asked, "For how long?" I don't know, sweetheart. Maybe forever. Because Daddy doesn't like me loving you? Because Daddy thinks that having too many people acting like parents might be confusing for you, and he wants to make sure you have a stable family with clear rules about who's in charge. But I'm not confused. I know you're not my mama. I know he's my daddy. I know the difference. I know you do, but sometimes adults make decisions based on what they think might happen, not just on what's happening right now. We walked down to the beach and spent the afternoon building an elaborate sandcastle complete with moats and towers and a bridge made of driftwood. Sophia worked with intense concentration, like she was trying to create something permanent in a world where everything important to her seemed temporary. When the castle was finished, she stood back and admired it with satisfaction. "It's beautiful," I said. "You should be proud of it." "It's going to wash away when the tide comes in," she said matter-of-factly. "Does that make you sad?" "A little. But that's what sandcastles do. They're not supposed to last forever. They're supposed to be perfect for right now." The wisdom in her words took my breath away. This 8-year-old understood something about impermanence and beauty that many adults never grasp, something about finding joy in temporary things, something about creating meaning even when you know it won't last. We collected shells and chased waves until the sun started to set, and then we sat on a piece of driftwood and watched the ocean turn gold and orange and pink in the dying light. Sophia leaned against my side, and I memorized the weight of her, the smell of salt and sunshine in her hair, the sound of her breathing. "Rebecca?" "Yes. Will you remember me? Every single day for the rest of my life. Will you remember all the good stuff, not just the sad stuff? I'll remember the elephant ear pancakes, and the way you sing in the car, and how you always ask for 5 more minutes when it's time to leave. I'll remember your laugh and your questions, and the way you make everything more interesting just by being there. I'm going to remember you too. And when I grow up, I'm going to find you again, and we can be family again without anyone saying we can't. That sounds like a beautiful plan." We drove home in comfortable silence, both of us exhausted by the emotional weight of the day. When I dropped her off at Jennifer's apartment, Sophia hugged me so tightly I could barely breathe. "I love you, Rebecca. I love you too, Sophia. More than all the stars in the sky. More than all the grains of sand on the beach. More than all the grains of sand on every beach in the world." She smiled then, that radiant smile that had been lighting up my life for over a year, and ran into her apartment to tell her mother about our day. I sat in my car outside their building for a long time, crying for everything we were losing and everything that could have been different if the world worked the way an 8-year-old thought it should. Christmas Eve arrived gray and drizzly, the kind of Portland weather that matched my mood perfectly. Sophia came to my apartment for our last visit, carrying a wrapped present and wearing the serious expression she got when she was trying to be brave about something difficult. We made hot chocolate and sat by the small Christmas tree I'd bought specifically for this day, this goodbye that felt more significant than any other goodbye I'd ever had to make. She gave me my present first, a hand-painted picture frame containing a photo of the two of us from our day at the beach. Around the border she'd written in her careful 3rd-grade handwriting, "Rebecca and Sophia, family forever." I gave her a necklace with a small silver heart and a book of poetry for children that we could both own, so we'd always have the same words to remember each other by. She put the necklace on immediately and held the book against her chest like it was a talisman. "This isn't really goodbye," she said firmly. "This is just, see you later." "See you later," I agreed, though we both knew it might be much, much later. When Jennifer came to pick her up, we were both trying not to cry. The handoff was awkward and painful, full of things that couldn't be said, and emotions that were too big for the small goodbye we were allowed to have. After they left, I sat alone in my apartment, surrounded by the remnants of the life I'd built around loving Sophia, and wondered how I was going to learn to be myself again without her. 15 years. 15 long years of birthdays I wasn't invited to, school plays I didn't get to see, scraped knees I couldn't kiss better. 15 years of wondering if Sophia remembered our time together, if she thought about me, if the promises we'd made to each other on that beach still meant anything to her. The first few years were the hardest. I'd catch myself buying children's books I thought she'd enjoy, only to realize I had no way to give them to her. I'd drive past playgrounds and scan the children's faces, hoping for a glimpse of the girl who'd once been the center of my world. I kept her artwork on my refrigerator long after it had faded, unable to take down the last physical reminders of our life together. Marcus and Jennifer's reunion lasted 3 years. I heard about the divorce through mutual acquaintances, who didn't know how much the information would devastate me. Marcus had indeed reverted to his old patterns, becoming distant and unreliable once the novelty of playing devoted father wore off. He'd left Jennifer and Sophia again, this time for a woman he'd met at his architecture firm, someone without the complications of a child, and an ex-fiancé who'd inconveniently loved his daughter. I wanted to reach out then, to offer support to Jennifer and reconnect with Sophia, but my pride and my pain held me back. They'd made their choice, I told myself. They'd chosen the possibility of a traditional family over the certainty of my love and support. I couldn't just waltz back into their lives the moment their perfect family fell apart. But I thought about Sophia constantly during those dark years. I wondered if she felt abandoned again, if she blamed herself for her father's departure, if she remembered that there had once been someone who'd promised never to leave her. The not knowing was almost worse than the goodbye had been. I tried to build a life without her. I threw myself into my teaching, becoming the kind of educator who stayed late to help struggling students and organized weekend enrichment activities. I dated occasionally, but I found it impossible to explain to potential partners why I had such strong feelings about a child who wasn't mine, why I carried a grief that seemed disproportionate to what they saw as a temporary guardianship situation. Eventually, I stopped dating altogether. I adopted a dog, a golden retriever named Sunny, and poured my nurturing instincts into volunteering at the animal shelter and mentoring new teachers. It was a good life, a meaningful life, but it always felt like something essential was missing. Years passed. I moved to a larger apartment with a garden where I could grow the flowers Sophia and I had once planted together. I earned my master's degree in education and became a curriculum specialist. I traveled when I could afford it, always sending postcards to an address I no longer had, messages that would never reach their intended recipient. On Sophia's 18th birthday, I almost called Jennifer. I sat with the phone in my hand for an hour, rehearsing what I might say, imagining all the ways the conversation could go wrong. In the end, I put the phone down and wrote a letter instead, one I never sent, pouring out 15 years of love and loss and hope onto paper that I filed away with all the other unsent letters I'd written to her over the years. Then, 3 months ago, on an ordinary Tuesday evening in November, my phone rang. The number was unfamiliar, but something made me answer, instead of letting it go to voicemail. "Hello, is this Rebecca Chen?" The voice was older, deeper, but unmistakably hers. I would have recognized it anywhere, even after 15 years of silence. "Sophia? I wasn't sure you'd still have the same number. I've been trying to find you for months." I sat down hard on my couch, my hands shaking so badly I could barely hold the phone. "How did you find me?" "Social media, mostly. And I may have called every Rebecca Chen in the Portland area until I found the right one." I laughed, though it came out more like a sob. "That sounds like something you would do. You always were persistent." I learned from the best. There was so much I wanted to say, so many questions I wanted to ask, but all I could manage was, "Are you okay? Are you safe and healthy and happy?" "I'm good. Really good. I'm in college now at Portland State studying art therapy. I'm living in the dorms, but I have a car and I was wondering, would you maybe want to have coffee sometime? I know it's been a long time, and I know the way things ended was complicated, but I've missed you every single day for 15 years. "I've missed you too," I whispered, "more than you could possibly know." We met the next evening at a coffee shop in Southeast Portland, not far from where Jennifer's apartment had been all those years ago. I arrived early and sat in the corner, my heart pounding, wondering if I would even recognize the woman Sophia had become. But when she walked through the door, it was like watching a movie of her 8-year-old self played in, fast forward. She had the same dark curls, though they were longer now and streaked with purple. The same bright eyes, though they were wiser now, older. The same smile that had once lit up my entire world. She was tall and graceful, wearing paint-splattered jeans and a vintage band t-shirt. carrying a worn leather messenger bag covered in buttons and patches. She looked like an artist, like someone who created beautiful things, like someone who had grown up to be exactly who she was supposed to be. When she saw me, her face broke into that radiant smile I remembered so well, and she crossed the coffee shop in quick strides and wrapped me in a hug that felt like coming home. "You look exactly the same," she said, pulling back to study my face. "You look like the most beautiful version of who you always were," I replied, and we both started crying right there in the middle of the busy cafe. We talked for 3 hours, catching up on 15 years of separation in one evening. Sophia told me about school, and her art, and her dreams of opening a therapy practice that combined traditional counseling with creative expression. She told me about the years after Marcus left, how she and Jennifer had struggled but ultimately grown closer, how they'd built a life together that was small but stable. "I never forgot you," she said as the coffee shop was closing around us. "Mama thought I would, thought I was too young to remember clearly, but I remembered everything. The way you made pancakes that looked like elephant ears. The songs you sang while we did dishes. The way you always listened to me like what I had to say was the most important thing in the world." "It was," I said. "It always was." "I used to get so angry with her," Sophia continued. "With Mama, for making me choose. I understood why she did it, especially after Marcus left again, but I was so angry that I had to lose you to try to have a relationship with him. You were just a child. None of it was your fault." "I know that now. I've been in therapy since I was 16, working through all the abandonment issues and the complicated family stuff. But Rebecca, I need to tell you something, and it's going to sound crazy." "Try me." Sophia took a deep breath. "You're the reason I'm studying art therapy. You're the reason I want to help kids who've been through trauma. Every major decision I've made in my life has been influenced by the 8 months I spent with you, by the way you showed me that love doesn't have to be conditional or limited, that families can be chosen as well as given." I stared at her, speechless. "You probably don't remember this," she continued, "but when I was living with you, I had this terrible nightmare one night about being lost in a dark forest. You sat with me and told me that even when we can't see the path forward, love leaves breadcrumbs that lead us back to the people who matter. I've carried that image with me for 15 years. I did remember. I remembered holding her while she cried, desperate to find words that would comfort her, reaching for the kind of metaphor she might understand. "I kept the necklace," she said, pulling the silver heart out from under her shirt. "I've worn it every day since you gave it to me. And the poetry book? I can still recite half of it from memory." Then she reached into her messenger bag and pulled out a large manila envelope. "I have something for you. Something I've been working on for 2 years." Inside the envelope was a bound portfolio, professionally printed and beautifully designed. The cover read, "Love Letters to My Guardian Angel, an art therapy project by Sophia Chen." Chen, she'd taken my name. Somehow, this young woman had found a way to carry both her biological family and her chosen family in her identity. "Open it," she said softly. The portfolio was filled with paintings and drawings and collages, all depicting memories from our time together. There was the butterfly conservatory we'd never gotten to visit, but which she'd researched and painted from her imagination. There was our day at the beach, rendered in watercolors that captured not just what we'd looked like, but how the day had felt. There were portraits of me reading to her, helping with homework, braiding her hair. But it was the final page that completely destroyed me. It was a painting of a woman and a little girl planting seeds in a garden, their faces turned toward each other with expressions of pure love and contentment. At the bottom, in Sophia's neat handwriting, were the words, "Some families grow from seeds planted in the heart rather than the ground." I couldn't stop crying. 15 years of grief and loss and love came pouring out of me in that coffee shop, and Sophia held my hands across the table and cried with me. "I don't understand," I managed to say. "Why are you giving this to me? Why now?" "Because next month is my 23rd birthday, and I wanted to spend it with you. Because I'm applying to graduate programs, and I want you to know about it. Because I'm getting serious with someone, and I want you to meet him. Because I don't want to live another day pretending that the person who shaped me most isn't part of my life." "What about your mother? How does Jennifer feel about this?" Sophia smiled. She's the one who helped me find you. She spent the last 5 years in therapy too, dealing with her own guilt about how things ended. She wants to apologize to you, if you're open to it. She wants to thank you for giving me the foundation of love that helped me survive everything that came after. I stared at this incredible young woman who had somehow found her way back to me, who had turned our painful separation into art, who had chosen to reclaim our relationship despite years of forced distance. Sophia, I said, what you've given me today, this portfolio, this conversation, this second chance, it's the most beautiful gift anyone has ever given me. I'm not just honored to be back in your life. I'm proud of who you've become, and I'm grateful that our love survived even when we couldn't be together. So you'll come to my birthday party next month? I wouldn't miss it for the world. That night, I drove home in a daze of joy and disbelief. Sophia was back in my life, not as the 8-year-old I'd lost, but as a remarkable young woman who had chosen to bridge the gap that others had forced between us. She had found a way to honor both her biological family and her chosen family, to create space for all the love in her life instead of being forced to choose. The next morning, I called in sick to work and spent the day reading through her portfolio over and over again, marveling at the talent and insight she'd developed, at the way she'd transformed pain into beauty. I thought about the seeds we'd planted together all those years ago, both literal and metaphorical, and how they'd somehow continued to grow even in the darkness of our separation. Later that week, Jennifer called. The conversation was awkward at first, full of apologies and explanations and mutual grief for the years we'd all lost. But by the end, we'd found a way to be grateful for each other again, to recognize that we'd all done the best we could with an impossible situation, and that Sophia's love had somehow been big enough to encompass all of our mistakes. Now, as I sit here preparing for Sophia's birthday party tomorrow, surrounded by the decorations I've been planning for weeks, I think about the title of the story. What she did left me emotionally shattered, but not in the way I expected when this all began. Sophia didn't shatter me with abandonment or betrayal or cruelty. She shattered me with the force of pure, unconditional love that had survived 15 years of separation. She shattered my assumptions about what family means and who gets to decide how we love each other. She shattered my grief and replaced it with joy, so intense it felt like breaking apart and being rebuilt at the same time. Tomorrow, I'll watch this incredible young woman blow out her birthday candles, surrounded by friends and family that now includes me again. I'll listen to her laugh and watch her create art and marvel at the person she's become. And I'll know that every day of those 15 years of missing her was worth it for this moment, this return, this proof that love really does leave breadcrumbs that lead us back to each other. Some stories don't end the way you expect them to. Sometimes, the person you thought you'd lost forever finds a way to come home. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.